Good evening, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and today we're going to be taking a look into places where both campaigns think they can either expand the map or where they think they're going to have to play defense. And we're going to be trying, I'm going to mostly ignore the obvious states that are involved. So, really, it's going to be here. And actually, I haven't seen anything from the campaign saying Delaware, but I have I have seen some data that indicates Delaware could be, competitive in the future. I've also seen some stuff people talking about South Carolina could go, but I tried to make it so that I have an equal number of states to talk about for both sides, and let's actually talk about how likely it is each of these states is going to be in play, but also how likely it is that they could flip in the near future. And we're going to start off with the states that either the Biden campaign thinks they may be able to make a play for, or I've heard or seen commentators suggesting that these states could be in play. And we're going to start off with the two obvious ones that you always hear about, and that's Texas and Georgia. Now, with Georgia, I've talked about this state quite a lot. The rural areas just are too red to be offset by the urban areas, and the suburbs are a little more conservative than they are in, say, a Virginia or an Oregon or California. They're conservative enough that I don't think it's happening this year, and I honestly am tempted to revise my statements to say that it might not happen until the 2030s. I said it could and probably will happen by 28, but not really before then. 24 if it's a really good year for the Democrats, but 28 was my original, but I'm starting to think that it might not happen until 2032. And Texas is, and that's not to say that Georgia isn't shifting towards the Democrats. It kind of is, but it is moving at a very, very slow pace. Things move slower in the South. Now, anyway, Texas. Texas could flip. Not in 2020, but 24, I could see it happening in a decent year for the Democrats, beyond what they should be expected to get. But I don't see enough movement in Texas, and each percent represents an even larger group. And of course, people are going to point to the midterms as their justification for their Texas prediction, saying, yeah, Texas is going to vote Democrat. Don't look at the midterms. Look at special elections, look at the partisanship of the state, and look at its recent history across all elections. Midterms, presidential years, governor's races, Senate races, House elections, etc. That'll give you a much better picture. Don't just pick one data point and focus on it and tunnel vision yourself. That's the biggest mistake I see from a lot of forecasters, both professional and amateur, is they will focus on the information that they want to focus on. I would love to say that Virginia is going to go red, but it's not. And the reason why I say I would love to say that is because I am not a big fan of what the Democrats in our state government are doing right now with the gun control and planned tax hikes and other stuff like that. I'm not saying that I'm a Republican, because I'm not. And I'm not saying I vote Republican, because most of the time I don't. But what I am saying is that Democrats have pissed me off enough that I would seriously consider voting Republican regardless, and I've already made the decision I will never vote Democrat. Ever. But, that's because they've pissed me off that much. But and I don't like to talk about my own political beliefs and philosophies simply because at the end of the day I'm trying to be unbiased, but I also have to reconcile that with the fact that I'm a human being. I have my own beliefs. I have my own viewpoint on things, and that is going to affect how I make my predictions. So, yeah. And I'll go ahead and talk about Utah and South Carolina now. And Utah, people are going to harp about one poll where most of the data shows that Trump is probably going to win it decently. We'll see if it's actually moving towards the Democrats, but my inclination is to say no, it really isn't. The state is extremely conservative. They have one of the more sought-after concealed carry permits, both resident and non-resident. They have extremely loose gun laws. Utah's a conservative state, and if you want to know why, just look up Mormonism. Yes, there is a social conscience aspect of it that a person may think would lead them to vote for more economically left-wing people, but you look at their senior senator Mike Lee, and that's just not the case, and their governor and their representatives too. So, yeah, there's that. In South Carolina, it's a similar story to Georgia, and a similar story to Virginia, and a similar story to North Carolina. It's just they start off with a much higher Republican base, but they also start off with basically this shift is coming about 20 years later than the shift in the other three Southeast Corridor states. And South Carolina is also, deep south, where the Holy Trinity is God, guns, and George W. Bush. And now let's move on to the states that the Democrats either think they're going to have to play defense in, or or the Republicans think they're going to be able to expand the map into. And one state I definitely agree is in play is Minnesota. There's a recent, I think it was Minneapolis Star-Tribune newspaper. Their pollster did a statewide poll that showed Biden up by 5, and if Biden is supposedly up by anywhere from 6 to 9 points, as I see a lot of people trying to point out, then being up only 5 in Minnesota is not good news. So what's more likely? Well, the truth is state-level polls can be a little bit more erratic than national polls, but... And I also think that the Minnesota Star-Tribune poll, I think they did the wrong thing by waiting by census data, but it's more forgivable in a state like Minnesota or Wisconsin or Michigan or Ohio or Pennsylvania. Indiana and Iowa are very similar as well, simply because there's more white people in the state, and it's like 90% of the electorate is going to be white, so it's perfectly forgivable just to use census data. Whereas in a more diverse state, you need to be careful when you do that. But Minnesota was one of the closest states in 2016, and it's probably going to be in that bunch in November. And I honestly think that if Trump is able to recover from any damage that the pandemic has caused, or I think it's safe to say we're at least in a downturn, but it's looking like we're getting a checkmark rebound rather than a V rebound, and that's good enough. I think that the worst of it is over from an economic standpoint. From a health standpoint, we'll see. But if everything stabilizes, this is going to help Trump's numbers, and this state could once again be within 2 points. So it is definitely a state that's in play, and the Biden campaign is definitely right to be concerned about Minnesota, and the Trump campaign is also definitely right to be trying to get Minnesota and spending money there. It's a smart move. And the one that I think is going to confuse a lot of people is New Mexico, where the Trump campaign is spending a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of resources establishing a ground game and establishing communications and get out the vote efforts and all sorts of other things. And there's been some relatively interesting data in that I think the civics showed Trump at dead even in New Mexico when it came to state level approval rating, which is it's certainly a good sign that he maybe is making an effort or making gains in the state. I think this is one of the more least likely pickups for the Trump campaign in terms of expanding the battleground from 2016. But it's not as far-fetched as it sounds, if that makes any sense. But it is a heavy lift. Now, here's one that I haven't really seen any efforts from the Trump campaign here in Old Dominion, but apparently the Biden campaign says that they're concerned that Virginia could flip. And maybe that's due to the state-level Democrats like Governor Northam and Lieutenant Governor Fairfax and our Attorney General and the State Assembly and the State Senate, and the fact that they decided to push through wildly unpopular gun control laws, and they flubbed that by saying, okay, we're going to back off. No, we're not. We're going to push it all. And then, no, we're going to back off. Then we're going to send in the National Guard. And no, we're going to back off. Yeah, I think the Biden campaign is probably... I don't think they're really right in being overly concerned, but spending a little bit of money here in Virginia is probably a good idea, simply because if they neglect it, Trump is going to say, hey, Virginia, do you want to vote for the winner? You know? And Virginia would actually be in a lot of maps enough to flip the election. So, yeah, Virginia could be a crucial state. If the cards fell in the exact right way for it to become the crucial state. I mean, that's true of any state, but Virginia, it's a little bit easier because it's already a competitive state in terms of percentages, at the very least. And then Oregon, a state that the Biden campaign really isn't concerned about, but the Trump campaign thinks they can make a play for, and I've seen them try to make a play for it. I don't think this is a realistic expansion. I would be focusing more on the Delawares of the world, the New Jerseys, the Connecticuts, Rhode Islands, the swingy states on the East Coast. The states with a lot of swing voters where your money is going to be better spent than trying to flip in Oregon, which is moving further and further to the left. At least with New Jersey and Delaware and Connecticut and Rhode Island, every now and then they're willing to elect a Republican to a statewide office. Sometimes they continuously elect Republicans to statewide offices. Sure, the Democrats start off with a healthy registration advantage as well as a partisanship advantage. The problem is there's a lot of what's known as swing voters, basically voters who vote for both Republicans and Democrats. And so while they may not be competitive in most elections, if you play your cards right and you put money into the state and you're able to convince these swing voters, you can win it narrowly as a Republican. Whereas if you're completely unable to do that, you're losing in a landslide rather than just, yeah, the Democrats won it comfortably, but it could have been worse, basically. So, we're looking at about 10 points more Democratic, but there's enough Republicans there's enough swing voters that a Republican could theoretically win it at the presidential level in all four of those states. Is it likely? No, of course not. Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible, but it requires a perfect strategy to capture them and a perfect candidate to capture them. And that's why I think it'd be smarter to be spending money in those states rather than Oregon, because Oregon is moving towards the Democrats at a faster and faster rate, and it's just an uphill battle for Republicans. But that's kind of what I think about the thoughts about expanding the battleground and expanding the electoral map. And it's about all I have to say. If you like the content, likes, comments, subscriptions always help, and I greatly appreciate each and every one of y'all. Have a nice day. Bye bye.